Well, hello and welcome to another episode of More Perfect Marketing. Today, we're going to dive into a conversation around something that we've touched on in other episodes. It relates to where prospects are, or where your existing customers are in their relationship with your business or their search to solve a problem, and before they've even met your business or found you as a solution. And there's a bunch of different places that you might A, encounter those prospects, B, things that you might be saying to or want to put in front of them, and ultimately C, the different types of channels that are going to be most effective for communicating those different things. Well, we're going to talk about one very specific area today, not the first encounter with a prospect, not the ad, not the initial opt-in to an offer, I don't know, a webinar or a download or a coupon or whatever it is that you use initially to connect with somebody, and not the end part, not the part where they're ready to buy, but that stuff that happens in the middle that moves them from the "Who are you?" all the way to the "Okay, let me grab my wallet, I'm ready." And to help me with this is somebody who actually specializes in this very area called, well, she calls it the middle of the funnel, and I think most people in the marketing world do. And that's Brandi Starr. Brandi, welcome.
Thank you for having me.
I don't know if I articulated that well or if I confused the matter, but you're the expert there, so I'd love your take.
Yes, yeah. So the middle of the funnel, and some people have different models. They use the infinity loop, the bow tie, whatever visualization you use. There are still phases to the process. You have to attract people to you. You have to communicate with them in a way that gets them ready to engage with your sales team so that they actually buy. And so many organizations, large and small, really focus on the top and the bottom. At the top, there's all of your programmatic ads and events and PPC and search and all of these things that consume an immense amount of budget. And then on the bottom, you have salespeople. And they are typically one of your most expensive human resources.
Mhm.
And the challenge is that a lot of organizations assume that they can take what's generated at the top and just hand it to the bottom and expect that sales team to work some magic. And for some organizations, for a period of time, when you've got those sales heroes, it can happen. I'm not trying to say that you can't pass those, lukewarm leads off and get something out of it, but we can't rely on always having sales heroes. And we also can't afford to dilute the significant effort that we put at the top by not properly nurturing and communicating in the middle. And so that is why we really, really hone in on that middle of the funnel, because we also feel the middle is where so many lessons are learned that can help inform the top and the bottom, can also help to inform, your service or product development, all of the things. And so this is why we focus in on MOFU, or middle of the funnel.
All right, there's two things that stood out in what you just said there that I want to circle back on. The first one is the sort of assumption, and particularly smaller organizations, smaller businesses make this assumption that you talked about in terms of, okay, we've gotten the lead, now let's execute the sale, and that there is a process in the buyer's thinking, their experience, that they're not maybe ready to move to that that point of purchase. And a lot of sales, because of the lack of what you are specializing in, a lot of sales never materialize, right? There's just that loss, and as lead gen business owners in the marketing space have often experienced, the clients complain those were terrible leads, right? And the fact is that maybe it wasn't a terrible lead, but a lack of follow up process or lack of middle of the funnel communication, right? So that's one thing. But then you said something there at the very end that I also wanted to circle back on. And now as I say, there was a second thing. I've totally lost what it was. So let's talk about that first one, and that second one will come back to me, I hope.
Perfect. Yeah, and it's a great place to start because I have had so many clients and just people I've had conversations with. They'll say, "Oh, this tactic doesn't work," or "That tactic doesn't work," or "Oh, we generate leads and sales just ignores them." And sometimes there are other problems. However, quite often it is a lack of understanding of the buyer's journey and trying to make that connection to sales too soon. And I like to use a lot of dating analogies because no matter what, we have all, if we're adults, have dated at some point. And it is like going on a first date, having a good first date, and following that up with, "Will you marry me?" And it's like, whoa, whoa, like I enjoyed the first date. There could be some potential here, but you're moving too fast.
Mhm.
And that's what we do in marketing. Someone downloads a white paper and 30 seconds later they're getting a call from sales. And it's like, I equate that to the proposal, coming after the appetizer. Like we're doing too much too soon. And so, really, we need to look at, we need to evaluate the top of funnel for what it is. Are we able to attract our ideal audience in a way that makes them continue to engage with us so that they can actually learn more? Because if we think about in a B2B environment, especially, I know a lot of your audience is service based businesses,
Mhm.
especially when looking for services, quite often there's a hint of a pain that they start to do some research to figure out who or what could I use to solve this problem. Not that they're necessarily committed to solving the problem at that point, but kinda some rumblings of we might need to do something different. In our space, sometimes it's a CMO that sees there may be some layoffs coming, and I may run into an issue where I don't have enough staff. Let me figure out if that does happen, who I may be able to bring in to help support me.
Mhm.
Or we have these aggressive goals and I don't have the expertise or I don't have the time. Maybe if we go in this direction, I might need someone. And so they start doing research, and this is where they will read your articles, watch your videos, attend your webinars, click on things that you are pushing to them in the form of ads or search. They're going to do some things that make them become aware of you as a potential solution to their challenge, but they're not necessarily in that moment ready to have a conversation or even necessarily know exactly what their needs are. And this is where there is the opportunity to stay in front of them, help them to really understand the problem that you solve, and to see if that problem aligns to the problem that they're having, and give them a little taste of what it's like to buy from you. So, if you're a service based business, what it's like to work with you, if it's a product that you're selling, what their life could be like using your product. And that is what happens in the middle so that as they are going through their own journey, like, because we think so much about the sales journey, the journey that we're thinking about, but the customer is going through their own process. There's other things happening in their business that are going to dictate when they're ready to have that conversation. And so you just have to strengthen that relationship until they start showing buying behavior. And in some cases, that's a clear hand raise, someone saying, "Call me, I want to talk." In other cases, you'll start to see a more surge of activity and engagement with the stuff that you're putting in front of them. And then you can say, okay, this might be an indicator that they're interested, and then pass that off to someone to follow up and give them the context that they need so that they can follow up intelligently, not just have a conversation as if they're ready to buy if they're just showing buying behaviors. Like those are very different in someone raising their hand, like you said, "I've got my credit card in hand," versus someone that's like, I could be shopping, kind of thing.
Yeah.
So yes, that accounts for those bad leads. They're not bad leads if we properly nurture them in the middle.
So the other question that I was going to circle back to is related to the idea of the connection of that middle to both the front end and the back end. Because if you're not necessarily addressing the pain point or the desire that somebody had when they began, right? You're not following. There's not continuity from why they first showed up to where you're taking them next. And likewise, if there's not continuity from where you've taken them in this middle of funnel to the sales conversation, or what the promise is when they get to, the offer, you also have the potential for losing. And so you run a business where you are operating sort of independent of those two areas, and I wonder, maybe you can talk a little bit about how you navigate this in terms of either working with a client or another service provider, but also just how to think through how those three portions of the funnel, the front end, the middle, and the close, or the sale, how they connect and how they need to connect with one another.
Yeah, and so the first thing that I would say is we don't work independent of the other two, we work adjacent.
Yes.
And
Okay.
that is a
That's a better
really
word.
important, yes, it's a really important nuance because, as you said, continuity is so important because there does have to be continuity. And we believe that no person, no organization is amazing at everything. And so we believe in just, we're going to do what we're amazing at, and we're going to align with people who are amazing at the other things.
Mhm.
And we have just enough expertise in the top and the bottom to help to facilitate and create that continuity. And so the way that we work, one of the foundational elements that I create with clients is what I call a communication map. And I'll describe it quickly because, it's the secret sauce, and I'm going to give it to you right here. It is literally I use a slide because I like PowerPoint, but you could really, any visualization tool will suffice. And I put the layers of the journey. So what are the stages that your buyer is going to go through? So, sometimes it's attract, introduce, inform, convert, continue. Different businesses, depending on what you're selling and how your are organized, those layers may be different. But down the left, I put all of the different phases of the buying cycle, not your opportunity stages, because they are not always the same. What is
Mhm.
the client going through? And then I align all the communications that should be happening at each layer. This has to be done collaboratively. So, depending on the client, some clients have internal people that do the top of funnel stuff. Some clients have an agency or another third party. We align to whoever is doing that work. In some cases, it's both. Like, we have one client that works with a very big agency, but they also have 3 people that are internal. So, we work with them and we figure out, what are you doing at the top? How are you organizing those things? So, in some cases, some clients are organizing by industry because they have different solutions for different industries. Sometimes it's by persona, sometimes it's by pain point. So, there is always going to be some form of organization at the top in how you're going to market and what those messages are. And so we try to create buckets of those. I call them narratives. There's all sorts of different terms that people use. So most clients are going to have, 3 narratives, sometimes less, sometimes more. But in general, we're going to bucket all of those things into those narratives. And each of those narratives is going to connect to a product or service offering. If this narrative resonates with this audience, what are they most likely to buy? Not like you can't sell them something else, not like it's always going to be 100%, but that is giving us the starting point. What
Mhm.
is the message that's going to resonate? And the end point, what are they likely to buy from us?
Mhm.
Um, and so, though defining those two things is the start of how we create the continuity in the middle. Because as we have those narratives bucketed, they could be running an abundance of things: content syndication, ads, SEO, social, all of the things, events. As long as they can bucket everything effectively, we can map how people flow through. So the most common thing, and I'm genericizing this because it does vary widely. But the most common thing is each narrative you have at the top has a corresponding campaign in the middle. So you might have 10 different top of funnel initiatives with different themes. I had one client, they had something that made an analogy between a technical product they sold and beer. And that was like a whole campaign. And that activity led into this one narrative campaign. But they had another thing that compared it to, I think, coffee.
Mhm.
That led into the same narrative. So we can run all sorts of different messages, create creative, all of those things at the top. But because we're bucketing them, they have a clear destination when they come into the middle. And so once they get in the middle, we have what are those things that should resonate with them to continue to move them along the journey based on where they came in. And then when they get ready to talk to sales, we need to have our technology set up in a way that when we pass them to sales, we are communicating to sales in a way that they know what has happened at the top and in the middle, so that when they are reaching out to have a conversation with that prospect or customer, they are having a conversation that continues the same line of messaging. And so that is the way that we create that continuity, is by building out this map that everyone is in agreement of what's going to happen, how are we going to communicate as they move through the journey. And it gets really messy because we got to draw lines of when you come out of here, you go to there. If you don't, it's got all the lines. And so that it's really clear. And so every group that's working on something, if I'm working on demand gen, I know when I'm starting a new initiative, I got to pick a bucket.
Mhm.
If I'm working on middle of the funnel, I know these are the kinds of people that will feed into this part of the bucket. If I'm sales and I know I'm getting people and they've been identified as being bucket A, I know they've done these things. And my technology, we're going to have it set up so that I've got some visibility into the specifics. And that's how you create that continuity, by having that strategy that is aligned across all teams. And in some cases, it's one person doing all of the things. So it doesn't necessarily mean you got to have a huge team, but that all of the communications are mapped out with a clear plan of how we're talking to them, why we're talking to them, what we're trying to accomplish. And that obviously is largely email, but there's other places where we use ad retargeting. Sometimes there's like online or in-person events. Like there's other tactics
Mhm.
that happen in the middle. I call the middle email plus. It's like email plus a bunch of other things, because we don't just go omni-channel
Yep.
in the middle. But that's how we create that continuity, and that's how we work with each, all the different players, so that everybody is collaborative but can still work interdependently and do their own things.
I love that you threw in there that even what you've described, can work if there's just one person doing all of these different, for years we worked with financial advisors, and a financial advisor could be serving a family that is, figuring out how to pay for college and needs to save for that, or they could serve somebody who's planning for retirement, and there's going to be different narratives as you've described, right? And so when that person says, yes, I'm ready to book the meeting with you, it's a lot better off, to be able to know that they've come in through one track versus another, as you've described, right? So it doesn't have to be as complex as, well, we have all of these different campaigns for all these different offers. It could be as simple as just two different approaches, and ultimately what's being sold is the same thing, which is a service, in the case of the financial advisor guiding them to the outcome thereafter. But I was thinking, as you were describing that, of the messiness and complexity of like a major retailer and all the different things that you could be juggling. So I think there's, it's a very wide spectrum, as you said.
Yes, it is extremely wide. I mean, I have seen in your scenario those narratives. That's what I would call the personas.
Mhm.
Because you are right. And that's where we can, especially with current customers, can use a lot of the data to assume some of those buckets. And so that is a good point. Like what I talked about, the top, middle, and bottom really tends to focus on driving net new, but it also applies for current customers,
Mhm.
because once they have bought from you, depending on your business model, you could be trying to get renewals. There could be some cross sell, upsell. There could be some level of expansion. And so there is, it's not the same kind of top of funnel, but there are going to be those top of funnel things that are trying to get them interested in something else. That they haven't purchased from you. And then there's, again, still that middle where we have to nurture them through it. And using financial services as a great example, I've worked in that space quite a bit with some, banks and credit unions. And those examples are great ones because when we have data, for example, someone, first time home buyers, when you have first time home buyers that are in kind of that late 20s to mid 30s range, usually you can make an assumption that they are usually in that early stage of life, potentially just got married, maybe trying to, have kids. Like, everybody's life choices are different, but there are some safe assumptions that we can make, based on the data that we do have, that can also help us to put them into buckets. So in some cases, when it's prospects and we know nothing about them, it is, what are they engaging with first? But for our customers, we have so much information. It's a whole different ball game, that we can be so much more sophisticated in how we are bucketing them. Because if I buy a home and that home is $5 million in, a city like Atlanta where the cost of living isn't high, it could be realistic that in a year you start marketing investment properties to me. Because
Mhm.
if I've got a $5 million home, I likely have the disposable income that I may want to invest in real estate if the interest rates are good, et cetera. So we have all this information that we can actually orchestrate the top differently for our customers, to then be even more savvy in what we can do in the middle, because we know so much more about them. So I'm really glad you brought that up, because a lot of times when we're talking about the funnel, people really just think about net new, but it applies just as much, and is even easier when you're dealing with customers, because there's so much information that we have about them.
So I got a question for you about process. There's a common question that comes up in like songwriting teams or Broadway shows that are written by a composer and a lyricist. Which comes first, the music or the lyrics? And I think what you've been describing here is that there's lots of decisions, lots of choices, and based on a starting point, then you build the other stuff. But it sounds like you can start in lots of different places, from the top of funnel. What is it that you're trying to hook somebody's attention around, or the middle of funnel, the opportunity that exists, and the types of things that you can communicate, and then work backwards. How do you navigate all of that?
So I start with the customer and the pain point. So it's not about any phase of the funnel. We always have to start with the customer.
Mhm.
And that is going to drive everything. And so the first conversation, if I was talking to a brand new business who has nothing in place, the first thing I would start with was, how do we bucket your customers? Because that's going to look different. Like I said, sometimes it's persona, sometimes it's industry, sometimes it's there's like, so what technology they have, or depending on what you're selling, it could be so many different things. So the first question is, how do we bucket your ICP?
Mhm.
What do they care about? What pains can you solve that are important enough for them to solve that we can message around? And we figure out those buckets of messaging. That is where I always start.
Mhm.
Step two to me is, if you're a business that has current customers, I actually like to start in the middle of the funnel, which is counterintuitive, but it is the place where you have the lowest cost and the greatest opportunity to do some testing. Because when you're testing and learning at the top, every single thing you're doing is costing money. And it's hard for businesses to give themselves enough runway with capital to do the testing that they need. So if we've got customers, I try and bucket those customers based on what we know and try out our middle funnel messaging. What is resonating? What is getting responses? Where are people raising their hands? What are they super engaged with? Allow what's happening in the middle to inform both the top and the bottom. Because again, sales could be, and I just had this conversation with one of our client strategists where he was having some challenge. There were some of his emails that he just didn't feel was landing. I looked at them and I was like, oh, here's some messaging that we're using in the middle that is resonating. How about trying to incorporate some of the learnings that I've had there into rephrasing this? And so, he's going to now test that. So we'll see
Yep.
how it goes. But so it's starting with the customer and the messaging and how do we bucket them? What do we need to say to them? What can we solve for them? Figure out and work through that messaging in the middle so you know what resonates, and then work up and down. How do you know? Because in some cases, what happens, you could discover that your sales team needs to be organized differently if you've
Mm.
got multiple sellers. So if you realize that your audience is really bucketed by industry, but your sales team is organized by territory, you may want to make that shift to organize your sales team by industry. You may learn that that works. You may be, a lot of times people are doing a lot of top of funnel marketing based on the product, but maybe you need to think about it based on the persona. And
Mhm.
so this is where what happens in the middle really can inform the rest, but you definitely have to start with an understanding of the customer and their needs.
You brought up a point that I want to actually shift the focus of our conversation in the last few minutes that we have together, because you brought up a point about how some of the decisions in marketing relate directly to operation or organizational structure. And it's a concept that I think is much more common to realize, recognize, and discuss in larger organizations. And in the business that I'm in, we tend to be introducing these ideas to small businesses and them going, oh, okay, ultimately that makes sense. One of the shifts that has happened over the last several years in larger organizations is a move away from a marketing focus and a move toward a revenue focus. And I've been admiring over your shoulder for the last several, minutes
Oh,
this book that you co-wrote, CMO to CRO. And I wonder if you can tell me a little bit about how that enters into all of the stuff that we've been talking about and why understanding it's not just about marketing, but it's about revenue is so very important to all of the stuff that we do.
yeah, so we wrote the book because we saw a need for change in how organizations were structured and how they were thinking about the go to market function. However, we know that this is very big conversation and it gets into so many levels, comp and all these sorts of things, that it is something that most companies don't tackle. So we took the approach of how do we move in the right direction? Start with the low hanging fruit, to use a buzzword, to move in the right direction so that the ultimate goal becomes a natural evolution. And so we believe, and whether you call it CRO or not, because there's a whole lot of debate around the titles and it's not about the title, we believe that all revenue functions should roll up to a single leader. And the reason for that is you need to have one person that is accountable across the board and has the ability to pull the right levers, invest here, pull back there, change here, pivot there, wherever is needed, looking at the whole in order to make the right decisions. Because when you have multiple leaders, we tend to operate in silos. We tend to have competing priorities. There is often impacts to compensation that impact decision making, and there's so many challenges. And so we believe CMOs of today are best positioned to lead revenue for a lot of reasons. But that is where we really focus on, let's get everybody under one umbrella. Let's have all of our goals line up. So, for what's happening at the top should align to, the next goal. We call it the domino effect. Everything's got to be lined up so that we're all working in the same direction. When that doesn't happen, we tend to be in the same boat, rowing with the same goal, but we're all rowing in different directions. And so we just spin in circles. And so that is really our philosophy. And going back to what you said about small orgs and not actually having all these people,
Mhm.
we believe even when you're small, you should outline the org chart with all the roles that should exist, even if the same name fills multiple boxes, because that's what happens. I mean,
Yep.
we're a small company. We're, company of 25. My marketing team is 3 people, including myself. We all wear multiple hats. So our names get, plopped in multiple boxes. But we have that larger organization mentality of who should own what, even though as a small company, we have multiple people doing the same thing. And it really helps as leaders to be able to look when you get to a growth point to say, what's the next role we need? And it's like, okay, we're going to not have Jane Doe do these 3 boxes. We're going to take that box from Jane and this other box from John, and we're going to make that a new role because they really should go together. And so it does help to plan for organizational growth when you start with the right mindset and putting people in the right boxes, even when they wear multiple hats.
I'm so glad that you brought that up, and that you talked about it in through the lens of the org chart, because I think I mean, that's an exercise most small organizations don't even go through, but it's very telling. Um, I want to make sure folks know how they can continue to stay in touch with you and follow you, and so beyond the book itself, you have another resource which we're going to share with folks as we wrap up. But I want to just give you a quick moment before we do that to talk about that organization that you have of 25 or so people, and what you do and for whom you do it.
Yes. So we are Tegrita. We are a Toronto based consultancy, but we're fully remote. So I'm in Atlanta. And we focus on the middle of the funnel. So if thinking about our background, we started as purely Eloqua technology consultants. And over the years, the business has evolved. And so email is still our sweet spot that we know inside and out, both strategy, process, technology. And we look at it from the lens of not just being a tactic, but really a revenue driver, and a strategy informant, so to speak, in really leaning into the middle of the funnel and the things that happen in the middle to really inform and drive revenue growth, and effectiveness and efficiency across the go-to-market organization. And so, we look at it as 4 components: the strategy, the technology, the process, and the performance reporting. And so for some clients, we do all of the things. In other places, we have clients that struggle with, one of those areas or more than one. And so sometimes we're just coming in, getting the technology right, getting the data flowing so that they can execute on their strategy. In some cases, they need help figuring out how to build out the strategy. And so if you are experiencing any of those challenges, would definitely love to talk to you more.
Oh, brilliant! And we'll have a link to both the business as well as this other resource that we're about to mention in the show notes. Keeping with our theme of it's not just marketing, it's also revenue. Tell us about your podcast.
Yes, it is called Revenue Rehab. It's like therapy, but for marketers. That's our tagline. And it really is. It is a passion project for me because leading marketing or leading any component of revenue is a tough gig and comes with a lot of pressure. And it's not just the execution. So we don't just cover the practice of all the things that we do, but we cover the whole human. And so we cover topics on leadership. We've done some things that, impact us as people. So like we did one on caring for aging parents, because there's a lot of marketing leaders who are at that age where, we're getting to the point where we have to, care for our parents, myself included. We've covered burnout, being anti-bias in your organization. So just all of the things that really impact go-to-market leaders. And so it's like the biggest challenges faced by business leaders today. We bring it to the couch. I generally always have a guest, although occasionally I do solo episodes, where we tackle a problem and, give good advice, good practical experience around how others have solved that.
Brilliant. And folks can find that at revenuerehab.live. And we'll have
Yes.
that link in the show notes, in addition to the link to Tegrita. Brandi Starr, this has been a fabulous conversation. Thank you so very much for joining me.
You are welcome. Thanks for having me. I have truly enjoyed this discussion.
Excellent. Folks, you have been listening to another episode of More Perfect Marketing. If you know somebody who could benefit from the conversation you just heard, please share this with them. Until next time, I'm David Baer. Take care.